The parcel weighed almost nothing. It was a small flat envelope, sealed with blue wax, addressed in the scratchy handwriting of some merchant on Duval Station who probably never thought twice about who would carry it or how far. Rail Dunmore thought about it plenty. He thought about every parcel. Not because they were interesting, most of them were not, but because thinking about the parcels was easier than thinking about how long the route still was. He sat in the cargo hold of the steadfast delivery and sorted the day's load. By system, by station, by drop point, the way he had done for 11 years. Outside the single porthole, space was dark and quiet and exactly the same as it always was. Inside, the ship smelled of oil and old metal and the particular kind of warmth that comes from a heater that has been running too long. Rail did not mind any of it. He had stopped minding a long time ago. He was 47 years old and had the look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors, even though most of his life had been spent in this ship. His hair was going gray at the sides. His hands were rough. He wore the standard gray uniform of the Galactic Postal Corps with no decoration except a small pin on his left collar that marked 11 years of unbroken service. On the same route, most postmen changed routes after 3 years. Some after 2. Route 7 had been available when Rail joined, and he had taken it. And then he had kept it, year after year, the way some people keep a chair. That is not particularly comfortable, but is exactly theirs. Route 7 was not a desirable posting. The circuit covered 14 stops, across 6 systems at the outer edge of what the Corps called the Ember. Reaches a stretch of space that other species avoided for reasons ranging from the practical to the superstitious. The relay stations were old. The docking ports were often broken. The clientele were a mix of miners, exiles, fringe traders, and one very old religious community on Het's World who received a newsletter every month and left a crate of dried fruit in exchange, which Rail ate slowly across the following weeks. 3 of the 14 stops were inside Vorith territory. That was the part that made other postmen nervous. The Vorith were, depending on who you asked, either an extinct species, a myth, or a territorial danger that had not yet been formally catalogued. The Galactic Assembly's official position was that the Vorith were a non-sapient protected fauna present in trace numbers across 4 uninhabited systems in the Ember reaches, and that their territory was flagged for future commercial review. What the Assembly meant by that was something Rail had never found it necessary to think about much. He delivered to 3 relay beacons inside Vorith space. He had done so for 11 years. He had never been attacked. He had never seen anything at all, which was either reassuring or strange, depending on how you thought about it. Rail did not think about it much. He had parcels to sort. He finished the sorting, made a note in the manifest, sealed the cargo hold, and went forward to check the nav. The ship was 3 hours from the first Vorith system, the one the core map, labeled simply as ER7 Alpha. No planet name, no colony designation, just a number and a letter, which was what the Assembly gave to places it considered empty. He set the approach angle, locked it in, and went to make something to eat. The galley was small enough that he could touch both walls without fully extending his arms. He made rice with a packet of flavoring that claimed to be chicken-based, which he doubted. He ate it standing up, looking at the star chart on the wall, a paper one, which he had pinned there years ago, and updated by hand whenever the Corps pushed a route correction. The paper map was not regulation. Nothing in the Corps manual said you could not have one, which Rail considered sufficient permission. He had circled ER7 Alpha in pencil a long time ago, not for any professional reason. He had just noticed, one day, that of the 14 stops on his route, it was the only one where he never saw anyone. Every other stop had someone. A face at a window, a hand to take the parcel, a word or two exchanged about the weather or the delay or the cost of fuel. ER7 Alpha had a relay beacon on the second moon of an unnamed gas giant, and the beacon accepted the data package automatically, and Rail would sit in the freighter for the required 30 minutes in case there was outgoing mail, and there never was, and he would leave. 11 years. Not once had there been outgoing mail from ER7 Alpha. He washed his bowl, dried it, put it away. The ship hummed around him. He went to the small crew bunk at the back, which he used for storage except for the single cleared space where he slept, and he picked up the book. He was reading a paper book, which he had bought from a trader on Duval 3 months ago and was 3/4 through. It was about a man who walked across a continent that no longer existed. Rail liked it. It felt familiar. He read until the proximity alert chimed. Then he put the book down, marked his page with a receipt from the dried fruit community, and went forward. ER7 Alpha appeared on the screen, gray and unremarkable, the gas giant. Beyond it a pale orange. The second moon was a dark smudge. He began the approach sequence, the same one he had run so many times he could do it, without looking at his hands. The communication console made a sound. Not the usual automated beacon ping. A different sound. A channel opening. Rail stared at it. In 11 years, that channel had never opened. The screen showed a single line of data, an outgoing signal from the surface of the second moon. No voice. No text message. Just a set of coordinates. Precise and deliberate, as if whoever sent them had been thinking about the exact right words for a very long time. He looked at the coordinates. He looked at the star chart on the wall. He looked at the coordinates again. Then he changed the approach angle, and he went where they pointed. The valley had no name on any map that Rail had ever seen, and standing at the bottom of it, he understood why. It was the kind of place that did not need a name. It announced itself. The rock walls rose on 3 sides, dark and ancient, cut through with deep grooves that might have been natural or might have been carved, he could not tell which. The ground was black stone, worn smooth by something heavier than wind, and everywhere, rising from cracks. In the rock, there was heat. Not the sharp heat of fire, the slow, deep heat of something that had been burning underground for a very long time. The steadfast delivery sat in the only flat space wide enough for it, its landing struts slightly uneven on the stone. Rail had run through every system. Checked twice. Everything was fine. He was just putting off going outside. He went outside. The air tasted like iron and something older than iron. The sky above the valley was a dark red where it met the ridgeline, lighter above. He stood next to the ship and looked around. Nothing moved. He had followed the coordinates exactly. He was in the right place. He went back inside and made tea. He brought the tea outside and stood with it and waited. If there was one skill that 11 years of postal work had built in Rail done more than any other, it was the ability to wait without becoming strange about it. He had waited in broken docking ports. He had waited in vacuum airlocks while machinery slowly decided whether to work. He had waited outside the homes of customers who were never going to come to the door, but who he could not mark as absent until the regulation time had passed. Waiting was not a problem. Waiting was just time passing, and time always passed. He finished the tea. He considered going back for a second cup. That was when the ridge above him moved. He did not panic. He noticed this about himself afterward, in a clear and curious way, that his first response was not fear but attention. Something very large had moved on the ridge. Something that had been there, perfectly still, for long enough that he had mistaken it for rock. It came down the side of the valley slowly. Not quickly, not in a rush. It moved the way something moves when it is not afraid of you, but is still deciding what kind of thing you are. By the time it reached the valley floor, Rail had a fairly clear picture of what he was looking at. It was roughly the size of the ship. Its scales were the same dark color as the rock, which explained quite a lot. Its eyes were pale gold, the color of old bone, and they were watching him with an expression that Rail could only describe as extremely interested and deeply committed to not showing it. It stopped about 30 meters away. It looked at him. He looked at it. He held up the empty mug. "I would offer you some," he said, "but I only made the 1 cup, and I finished it." The creature, the Vorith, because that was what it was, and Rail had figured that out approximately 12 seconds after it came down the ridge. Tilted its head. The motion was oddly familiar. Dogs did that. Birds did that. Apparently, very large ancient beings of terrifying power also did that. It made a sound, deep and resonant, something between a vibration and a word. And it took Rail a moment to recognize it as Galactic Standard spoken at a register so low it was hard to follow. "You are the carrier," it said. "Postman," Rail said. "Rail Dunmore. Postal Corps, Outer Reaches, Route 7. Another tilt of the head. You come every cycle. Every standard month, yes. I have a beacon delivery at your relay station. We know. The pale eyes did not blink. We have watched you come and go for 11 of your years. Rail thought about that for a moment. You could have sent outgoing mail, he said. The channel is always open. The Vorith made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was hard to be sure. We did not know if you were safe. And now, it said, and something in its posture shifted, very slightly, something that in a human would have been the equivalent of sitting down. We have decided to find out. I am called Deva. Rail extended his hand, then reconsidered the scale difference, then extended it anyway. Deva looked at it. Then, with a precision that was almost funny, given the size of its claws, extended one claw and very carefully touched his palm. Rail did not flinch. He had decided very quickly that flinching was not something he was going to do today. Rail, he said. Rail, Deva repeated. The name sounded strange in that deep voice. Like a small stone dropped into a very large cavern. What is a parcel? That was the beginning of the strangest conversation of Rail's life, and he had worked Route 7 for 11 years, so that was a high bar. Deva had clearly prepared questions. They came out in a careful order that suggested they had been thought about beforehand, possibly for a long time. What did the packages contain? Where did they come from? Who decided what was important enough to send? Why did someone like Rail carry them instead of a machine? Rail answered all of it. He was honest about the parts that were boring, which was most of it. Deva listened with the focus of someone being told something that did not fit into any category they already had. When Rail explained that he had been assigned Route 7 because it was available and no one else wanted it, Deva went very still. No one wanted it, Deva said slowly. Because of us. I assume so, yes. And you took it anyway. It was a route that needed covering. Deva was quiet for a long moment. Then, you are a strange creature, Rail. Dunmore. I've been told, Rail said. On the ridge above them, something else watched. Larger than Deva. Older. Its scales were paler, almost gray, and its eyes were the dark red of cooling stone. It had not moved once during the conversation. It had watched the small humans stand in the valley, make no threats, show no fear, answer every question with the same flat honesty, and it had felt something shift inside itself that it had not felt in a very long time. The elder Vorith, whose name was Garath, had watched many things come and go in his years. Conquerors, diplomats, traders, scientists. They all had one thing in common. They came knowing what they wanted. This one had come with a manifest and an empty mug and no obvious agenda whatsoever. Garath watched him walk back to his ship as the light changed. The human did not look back. He simply went, the way he had come, with the same unhurried steadiness. He would be back next month. He always was. Garath remained on the ridge until the ship was gone. Then he turned and went down into the deep tunnels where the others waited, and he sat with what he had seen for a long time before he said anything at all. Months have a way of becoming years when no single one of them feels like much. Rail delivered to ER7 Alpha in the 3rd month, and Deva was waiting at the valley. He delivered in the 4th month, and Deva brought a second Vorith who stood at the far end of the valley and watched, but said nothing. By the 7th month, Deva was waiting at the edge of the landing zone, which required Rail to be more careful with the ship's thrusters, and by the 12th month, they were eating together, which was more complicated for one of them than the other. Rail ate his packaged meals on a flat rock near the ship. Deva ate something large that Rail did not examine too closely, and they talked, and the talking had slowly become the kind that happens between people who are no longer checking each other for danger. Deva was curious about everything, the way a young person is curious not because they are gathering information, but because the world keeps producing things they have no category for, and they find this wonderful instead of alarming. He asked about the other stops on Route 7, about Duval Station, and the dried fruit community, about why humans used paper when datapads were lighter, about whether Rail had a family, and when Rail said he had 2 sisters, and a father he called every few weeks. Deva asked how far away they were. About 40 light years, Rail said. Deva considered this. And you call them? When the relay lets me. The connection is bad out here. But you try. Every few weeks, yes. Deva was quiet for a while. Then he said, we used to have a way of speaking. Across distances. Fire song. You breathe a pattern into a flame, and the pattern carries. We can hear one another across a whole system when the air is right. He paused. There are not enough of us left for it to reach very far now. Rail looked up from his rice. How many of you are there? 38. Across 4 systems. The number sat in the valley air between them and did not get smaller. I'm sorry, Rail said. Deva's pale gold eyes moved to him. You did not do it. No, but I'm still sorry. After that conversation, Deva started teaching Rail Fire's song. It was Deva's idea, and it was, from a practical standpoint, a complete failure. Rail could not produce fire. He could not produce the specific resonant vibration that Fire's song required in the chest. What he could produce was a close approximation of the tonal pattern, hummed at normal human pitch, which came out sounding something like Fire's song being performed by someone with a head cold in a very small room. Deva found this deeply distressing and also, clearly, the most entertaining thing he had encountered in years. He corrected Rail every session with the focused energy of someone who believed, against all evidence, that improvement was still possible. Rail practiced between visits. He hummed the patterns while sorting parcels, while eating, while running system checks. He was still not good at it by the second year. He was slightly less bad, which Deva said counted. It was in the second year that Garath spoke to Rail directly for the first time. Rail had known Garath was there. He had known since the second visit. The older Vorith was not subtle about watching. He was simply very still, which was different. Rail had not pushed it. People and beings that were not people in the technical galactic sense, but were clearly people in every way. That mattered came forward when they were ready, and not before. Garath came forward on a gray afternoon when the valley was cold and the heat rising from the cracks in the ground made the air ripple. He was larger than Deva. His scales had the faded look of very old stone that has been through every kind of weather. He walked to within 10 meters of Rail and stopped, and his eyes were the color of old embers. Deva says you know our song, Garath said. Deva is being generous, Rail said. I hum at it. He says you practice. I do. Garath regarded him. Why would you practice a thing you cannot do? Rail thought about that for a moment. Because someone took the time to teach it to me, he said. That seems worth respecting. The old Vorith was still for a long time. Then he lowered himself to the ground, which took a while and involved a great deal of the valley, and he said, I will tell you something, Rail Dunmore, and then I will ask you a question. What Garath told him took a long time. It was the history of the Vorith, and it was not a short history. They had been old when most of the current galactic species were still figuring out fire. They had built things, not ships, not stations, but cities of carved stone and fire song, and a kind of knowing that did not translate well into any existing language. They had been approached by the empire that later became the Syndicate and its predecessors, asked to join, asked to submit their territory for trade rights, asked in the particular way. That meant something unpleasant was coming if the answer was no. They had said no. Not with war. They had not wanted war. They had simply withdrawn, gone deep into their systems, removed themselves from galactic traffic, and waited for the interest to pass. The interest had not fully passed. It had simply changed shape. Now there was a legal instrument, a declaration, decades old and quietly maintained, that classified the Vorith as non-sapient protected fauna. It meant their territory was technically available for commercial claim once the last confirmed living Vorith was documented. It meant that 38 people, spread across 4 systems, were the only thing standing between their home and a mining fleet. The Syndicate knows we are still alive, Garath said. They have known for years. They are waiting for us to become fewer. He said it without anger. That was the part Rail found hardest to sit with, not the fact, but the tone. The flat, old tiredness of it. And now you know. You are the first outside being to know in 30 years. He looked at Rail. My question, Garath said, is this. You have nothing to gain by telling anyone. You are a postman on a route no one wants. Why would you speak of what I have told you, when staying silent cost you nothing? Rail looked at the valley floor. He looked at his hands. He thought, not 4 The first time that he was not a diplomat or a lawyer or anyone whose opinion was supposed to matter in a conversation this large. Because it's true, he said. That's enough. Garath looked at him for a long time. The old eyes did not blink. I have lived for 400 years, Garath said slowly. I have met conquerors. I have met saints. I have met everyone in between. He paused. I did not expect a postman. Route 7 was available, Rail said. I took it. And Garath, for the first time and longer than Rail would ever know, made the sound that the Vorith make when something has genuinely surprised them. It was low and warm and came from somewhere deep in the chest. Deva, from across the valley, looked up sharply. He had not heard that sound in years. Rail did not know what it meant, but it did not sound bad. Nobody noticed what Rail was carrying. That was the point. The letters started small. Garath had spent 3 months learning to write. In Galactic Standard, not from a program, but from a physical guide that Rail brought on his next visit, an old teaching text from a children's education supply company on Duval that he had ordered because it was cheap. And because it worked. Garath sat with it for 3 months. His handwriting, when it appeared, was enormous and extremely precise, the way things are when great care is being taken by something with very large hands. It was also, in its own way, beautiful. There was weight to every letter, as if each one had been considered before it was placed. The first letter was addressed to a Dr. Pella Wuss at the Galactic Assembly's historical archive on the main relay hub. Dr. Wuss had published, 22 years ago, a paper on pre-syndicate sapient species classifications that Rail had found in a digital archive by searching, on a guess, for anyone who had ever publicly disagreed with the Assembly's fauna declaration on the Vorith. The paper was 40 pages long and deeply detailed and had been cited 4 times in 22 years, all 4 times by Dr. Wuss herself. The second letter went to a retired Assembly judge named Faro, who had spent his career ruling on territorial rights disputes and had once, in a dissenting opinion that went nowhere, written that the legal definition of sapience used by the Assembly was catastrophically circular and designed to exclude rather than determine. He had retired to a station in the mid-reaches and, as far as Rail could tell, spent most of his time gardening. The third letter went to a historian on a university station that Route 7 passed within range of every second month. The historian studied the pre-syndicate era and had a public record of lectures that were dense and careful, and told by someone who clearly believed that what had been forgotten mattered. Rail carried all 3 letters the way he carried everything, logged in the manifest under the sender field G Vorith, ER7 Alpha, sealed, stamped, and routed for delivery. The Postal Corps did not read personal correspondence. That was a foundational rule, older than most of its other rules, and it was taken seriously. He noted that the return address was in Vorith territory. He noted that the recipients were scholars and a retired legal officer. He noted nothing else because it was not his business to note anything else. He delivered them. He waited for responses. Responses came. Over the next year, Garath received 6 replies. 4 were cautious and academic. 1 was from the historian and ran to 12 pages. 1 was from Judge Faro, and it was short, and the last line said, "If what you describe is accurate, then what has been done to your people is not legal under the original Treaty of the Outer Reaches. I am old and I am retired, but I still know the relevant clause. Write to me again." Rail carried all of it, back and forth, month by month, the way he always did. The syndicate noticed on the 7th month. He was docked at Brennan's outpost, which was a fuel and supply station 3 systems from the edge of Vorith space and the last stop before the reaches on his outbound circuit. He was refueling and checking his delivery list when the man appeared at the base of the loading ramp. The man was dressed well, not in a showy way, in the controlled, deliberate way of someone who understands that good clothes are a statement about power. His name, he said, was Orel Feth. He was a commercial liaison for the syndicate's Resource Development Division. He had a pleasant face that Rail did not trust from the first moment, for no reason he could have explained, and every reason that turned out to be accurate. "You've been delivering correspondence into Vorith territory," Feth said. "I deliver correspondence everywhere on my route," Rail said. The Vorith territory is flagged for commercial review. You're aware of that? I'm aware of the flag, yes. Rail continued checking his manifest without looking up. I deliver to registered stop points within that territory. The relay beacon at ER7 Alpha is a registered core stop on Route 7. I've been servicing it for 11 years. Feth smiled. It was the kind of smile that was not meant to be warm. The correspondence you've been carrying. It's been addressed to assembly archivists, legal scholars, a retired judge. He paused. That's an interesting pattern. For someone on a dead-end route. Parcels go where they're addressed, Rail said. I don't choose the recipients. No. Feth reached into his case and produced a sealed document, an official syndicate instrument, stamped and certified, formal in the way that only something backed by a lot of money can be. I have a notice here. For the Vorith territory. First stage of commercial extraction review. I need it. Delivered to the territory's registered point of service. He held it out. I understand that's you. Rail looked at the document. He took it. He read the address. He checked the stamps. He turned it over. He put it into his bag. I'll deliver it, he said. Feth nodded, satisfied. He walked back down the ramp. Rail watched him go. Then he went inside, sat down at the ship's narrow administrative desk, and opened the Postal Corps Regulation Manual. He knew the section he wanted. He had read it years ago, in a bored hour, and he had a good memory. Section 14, Subsection 7, Regulation 3, any parcel addressed to a non-sapient. Protected fauna classification, as defined by the Galactic Assembly, required a sapience review period prior to delivery, as the Corps did not deliver to animals. The review period was 90 days. The review had to be filed with the Corps Regional Office, which would then notify the Assembly's classification board, which would issue a determination. The clause had been written 70 years ago to prevent someone from theoretically mailing something to a herd of animals and claiming delivery rights to their territory. It had probably never been used for anything. Rail filed the review. He noted the sender. He noted the recipient's legal classification. He noted that under regulation, delivery was suspended pending determination. He submitted it all to the regional office of Commander Aldris, his distant superior, with a cover note that said, routine regulatory compliance. Please advise on timeline. Commander Aldris read the filing 3 times. Then she read the document that had triggered it. Then she sat very quietly at her desk for a while. She approved the review. 90 days. When Rail landed in the valley on his next visit, Garath and Davo were both waiting. He climbed out of the ship and stood in the familiar heat of the stone and said, plainly, I bought you time. Garath's old ember eyes looked at him. How much time? 90 days to start. More, if the correspondence keeps moving. And after 90 days? We deal with that in 90 days, Rail said. For now, is there anything you need me to carry? There were 4 letters. Garath had been busy. Rail logged them in the manifest, labeled and sealed, and went to make his turnaround check. Behind him, Davo watched with the expression of someone who had just seen a small creature walk up to something much larger than itself and refuse, politely but completely, to be afraid. He turned to Garath. He did that with paperwork, Davis said. Yes, said Garath. That is. Davis searched for the word. Remarkable, Garath said quietly. That is the word. The fleet arrived on a Tuesday. Rail knew it was a Tuesday because he kept a paper calendar on the wall of the cargo hold, the kind with 1 page per month and a small picture at the top. This month's picture was a lake on a planet he had never been to. He had been looking at it for 28 days while he ran Route 7 and watched the Syndicate's commercial fleet assemble itself, system by system, at the edge of the Ember Reaches. He tracked it through the public shipping registries, which listed every vessel's position and classification. 12 ships, all marked as commercial resource survey vessels, all perfectly legal. The 90-day review had ended 2 weeks ago. Commander Aldris had written to him not in official language, but in the careful plain words of someone who was worried and trying not to say so directly to tell him that the Assembly's classification board had rejected the review appeal. The Vorith were still legally classified as non-sapient protected fauna. The extraction notice was valid. The syndicate had the right to enter the territory and begin survey work. What they did not have the right to do was anything that disrupted an active postal route. Rail had found that clause 4 months ago, buried in the Treaty of the Outer Reaches, which was the founding legal document of the entire postal operation. In this region of space, Clause 31. It was not a large clause. It was 4 sentences long. It said, in the dry formal language of a document written by Committee 70 years ago, that no territory actively serviced by the Postal Corps could be declared abandoned, unclaimed, or eligible for commercial extraction while active service was ongoing, as the presence of postal service implied ongoing civilizational activity that required legal review before commercial proceedings could commence. The clause had been written to protect small colony settlements that the Corps served, but the Assembly had not yet formally recognized. It had probably been used twice in 70 years. Nobody thought about it. It was 4 sentences in a document that ran to 300 pages. Rail had been actively servicing Route 7, including the 3 stops in Vorith territory, for 14 years without interruption. He had the delivery records, every single one, logged and stamped and stored in the core system. 14 years of proof that Route 7 was active, that its stops were real, and that someone was using them. He had sent the clause to Judge Faro 3 months ago, along with his delivery records for the past 14 years. Judge Faro had sent it to 3 other retired legal scholars. One of them had contacted Dr. Wuss. Dr. Wuss had, quietly, sent the chain of correspondence to a journalist on the Assembly's main information hub, along with her own 22-year-old paper on sapiens classifications and a new addendum she had written specifically for this situation. It had published 4 days before the fleet arrived. Rail had read it on his data pad while orbiting Het's world, waiting to pick up the dried fruit. When he reached Vorith space, he was not alone. The extraction fleet was holding at the system boundary, 12 ships sitting in formation, waiting for authorization to cross. Authorization had been applied for. It had not yet been granted, because 3 days ago, the Assembly's Legal Review Board had received a formal challenge to the extraction order, filed under Clause 31 of the Outer Reaches Treaty, with 14 years of delivery records attached. A legal challenge was not a refusal. It was not a victory. It was the system doing what the system did when someone had followed the right steps. It paused, and it looked, and it took time to decide. Time that the syndicate had not planned for and did not have an easy answer to. Rail landed in the valley. The ground shook slightly when Garath came. All of the Vorith who lived in this system were there 11 of them, ranging from Garath's immense age-pale presence to 2 young ones who were barely larger than Rail's ship. They had gathered around the valley's edges, and the heat rising from the stone was stronger than usual, and the air tasted of iron and something that might have been fear or might have been readiness. Rail had learned, in 3 years, that the 2 things felt similar in a place like this. Deva was at the landing zone. He looked at Rail without the usual warm curiosity. He looked the way someone looks when they are holding something difficult in both hands and have been holding it for a long time. They came, Davis said. They came, Rail agreed. We will fight them. I know you will, Rail said. I'm asking you not to. Not yet. Why? Not a question exactly. More like a stone being placed on a scale. Because if you fight them now, you lose. Not because you're weak. Because they'll document every second of it and use it to prove you're dangerous. And then the Assembly will authorize military intervention, and 38 people cannot hold that off forever. Rail looked up at Garath, who had positioned himself at the high end of the valley. What I'm asking you to do is harder. I'm asking you to wait a little longer. You said that before, Garath said. His voice came down the valley like heat from the rock. I know, and it bought time. What I've done now isn't just time. It's a record. Everything Garath wrote. Everything the scholars published. 14 years of delivery logs. A retired judge's legal opinion. A journalist who has an audience at the Assembly hub. Rail stood in the center of the valley and looked at the Vorith around him, old and young, vast and terrifying, and, at this particular moment, looking at him. The fleet out there is commercial. It is legal, but it is also operating in front of everyone who has now read about you and every decision they make is being watched. They can cross the boundary. They have the paperwork. But crossing it today, with a legal challenge on record and a published article and a retired judge's statement, costs them more than staying costs them. Silence. The valley heat rose around his words and carried them up. Garath looked at him for a long time. Then, are you afraid? Yes, Rail said, without hesitation. But you are still here. I said I was afraid. I didn't say I was leaving. Garath made the sound again, that deep, warm sound from somewhere in the chest. Several of the other Vorith turned at the sound. The two youngest ones crept slightly closer to the valley floor, drawn by it the way young things are drawn by warmth. The fleet held its position for 3 days. Then it retreated to the nearest syndicate station, logged a delay in proceedings due to legal review, and went quiet. Orel Feth sent Rail a message. It was brief and very controlled, and said in the precise language of a man who was furious and would not say so, that this was a delay, not a resolution, and that the syndicate had significant resources with which to pursue its legal standing, and that Rail would be advised to consider whether his postal license was something he valued. Rail read it. He wrote back one line. My next delivery to ER7 Alpha is scheduled for the 14th, weather permitting. He sent it and went back to sorting parcels. In the valley below the ridge, Davis sat near the ship long after it was dark, and the heat from the stone had softened to something gentle, and he thought about a creature who weighed less than one of Garath's claws, who carried letters back and forth across the dark between the stars, who hummed Fire's song badly and practiced it anyway, and who had looked at a fleet of 12 ships and answered their question about fear with the same plain, level honesty. He answered everything. He was still thinking about it when the stars moved and the night got old. 3 years after the fleet retreated, a parcel arrived at Rail's ship on the day he was preparing to leave Het's world. It was large and flat and sealed with the official stamp of the Galactic Assembly's Bureau of Sapient Species Recognition. He held it for a moment before he put it in the bag. It was not heavy. The most important things rarely were. The ruling had not come quickly. Nothing in the assembly moved quickly, which was either a feature or a failure depending on how urgently you needed it to move. The legal challenge under Clause 31 had triggered a secondary review, which had triggered a classification hearing, which had brought in a panel of 7 arbiters, 3 of whom had clearly read Dr. Wuss's paper and 1 of whom had clearly read it twice. Garath had submitted testimony in writing, pages and pages of it, in his enormous precise handwriting, translated into formal galactic standard by Deva, who had turned out to be very good at languages. Judge Faro had submitted a legal opinion that ran to 60 pages and reportedly caused significant discomfort to 2 members of the Assembly's Commercial Affairs Committee. The historians, once they started, were difficult to stop. It turned out that people who spent their lives studying what had been forgotten had a great deal to say when the forgotten turned out to still be alive. The ruling was 12 words in its summary form. The Vorith were recognized as a sapient species under galactic law, effective immediately. The territory was reclassified. The extraction authorization was nullified. The syndicate had 60 days to remove its survey vessels from the Ember Reaches. Rail was the one who delivered the news. That was not planned. It was just that the official recognition document was addressed to the Vorith homeworld, and the Vorith homeworld was on Route 7, and Route 7 was his route. He landed in the valley on a morning when the sky over the ridge was a pale and clear blue and the heat from the stone was gentle. He climbed out of the ship with the parcel under his arm, and the valley was full. He had never seen the valley full before. He had seen Garath and Deva, and sometimes a few others at the edges. Now there were 11 Vorith in this system alone, and he could see, on the ridges, more than that. Word had moved in fire song ahead of him. They had known he was coming. He walked to the center of the valley and held up the parcel. Deva was the one who took it, very carefully, in both front claws. He broke the seal. He read what was inside. The reading took a while because Deva was not reading quickly. He was reading the way you read something when you want to make sure it says what you think it says, and then when it does, you need a moment before you can say anything. He turned to Garath. He said something in Fire's song. His voice cracked on. The last note. Garath was still for a long time. Then he lowered his great head and made a sound that Rael had never heard before, long and low and resonant, something that was not quite song and not quite word, and the Vorith on the ridges answered it, one by one, until the valley was full of sound that pressed against Rael's chest and made his eyes sting. He did not try to stop it. He just stood in the middle of the valley and let it wash over him. When it was quiet again, Garath looked at him. "There is something we would like to do," Garath said. The ceremony was called the Rite of the Long Road. Garath explained it while the Vorith prepared, which involved moving to specific positions around the valley in an arrangement that Rael recognized, slowly, as a pattern, the same kind of careful geometry he had seen in the oldest ruins, the ones Deva had shown him in the tunnels beneath the valley. The rite was old. Garath said it had last been performed 230 years ago for a Vorith named Sorith, who had walked from one side of their territory to the other. A journey of 3 years carrying news of a peace agreement to settlements that would otherwise never have received it. The rite was for those who carry, without stopping, across distances that would break most things. Rael stood in the center of the pattern while the Vorith breathed Fire's song into the air around him. He could not produce fire. He could not do what they were doing, but he hummed along with the tonal pattern badly, as always, in his flat human way, and Deva, standing closest to him, made the sound of a laugh inside the song, and somehow that was part of it too. At the end, Garath spoke a name in Fire's song. It was the name being given. The Vorith tradition was not to translate such names because the translation was always wrong. The word did not mean one single thing, but several things at once, layered on top of each other the way sounds layer in Fire's song. Deva told Rael afterward, in his careful galactic standard, that the closest you could get was something like the one who always comes back. But it also meant the one who finds the road in the dark. And underneath that, in the older layer that Deva said was hard to put into any other language, it meant something like brother. In Vorith tradition, that was what a brother was. The one who came back. Rael stood in the valley and accepted the name and did not try to say anything, because he did not think any of his words were big enough for the moment, and he had learned long ago that silence in the right place was not the same as having nothing to say. Later, when the ceremony was done and the light was going gold over the ridge, Deva walked with him back to the ship. The younger Vorith moved carefully on the stone, the way he always did near the landing area. His pale gold eyes were quieter than usual. "The ship needs a new compression seal on the third engine," Deva said. Rael looked at him. "I know. I've been putting it off. I can fix it." "You've done engine work?" "I looked at the schematics," Deva said. "When you were not here. I accessed them through the data port on the relay beacon." A pause. "I hope that was permitted." Rael thought about it. "Technically, it was a core data port." "I can fix it," Deva said again, firmly. "Give me 3 weeks." 3 weeks later, the third engine ran better than it had in 2 years. Rael ran the diagnostic twice because he did not quite believe it. Deva sat on the ridge above the landing zone and watched with barely concealed satisfaction, the way Rael had learned to recognize as the young Vorith's version of pride. He stayed an extra day. He and Deva sat in the valley while the heat rose from the stone and the sky darkened overhead, and Deva taught him a new Fire song pattern, one that Garath had asked him to teach. It was not a complex pattern. It was the one the Vorith used as a greeting between people who have not seen each other for a while, but are glad to have come back to the same place. Rael hummed it. He was still not good. He was less bad. "Better," said Deva. On the morning he left, Garath was on the ridge. He always was now when Rael departed, standing on the high stone to watch the ship go. Rael looked up at him from the base of the ramp. He hummed the greeting pattern once, flat and human and imperfect, into the cold morning air. Garath answered it in Fire song. The sound rolled down the valley and through the ship's hull and into Rael's chest, where it sat warm for a long time. He lifted off. He set the NAV for the next stop on Route 7. He logged the Delivery 1 official galactic assembly document. Recipient confirmed. Status complete. He made a note in the manifest that there was outgoing mail at ER7 Alpha For letters, one of them addressed to Dr. Wuss, one to Judge Faro, one to the historian, and one to a young linguistics student at the Assembly Hub who had written to ask if anyone could teach her fire song. The last one had been Dave's idea. Rail set the autopilot. He picked up his book. He found his page dried. Fruit receipt, slightly sticky at one corner. Outside the porthole, the stars were the same as they always were, dark and quiet and arranged in exactly the right pattern to remind a person that space was very large and they were very small, and none of that meant anything was impossible. Route 7. On schedule. As always.